Before I hand over to Daniel Hart, who's one of our committee members, to introduce our speaker today. Because we've got Tech Summit this month, we don't usually do events on the Tech Summit month, but we couldn't pass up this special occasion to mark Ministry of Awesome's 10th anniversary. I'll just start with a thank you to our sponsors. So Canterbury Tech has some amazing sponsors that have been supporting us all year. So we've got the UC School of Business. They're bringing the most relevant MBA program and executive education program in the country. The reason I know that is because I also teach there, so with my other hat on, always keen to take everyone else's courses as well. AWS, they're known for their infrastructure services, but they're ready to assist businesses with lots of knowledge areas. So if you're exploring something new, they have a really great team to reach out at, whether it's AI or data automation, whatever it is. We're also working with AWS to get the AWS Restart program back into Christchurch, which is helping to train people in infrastructure basics. We've got Lumen PDF. They've recently won the Deloitte's Fast 50 fastest growing tech business in Canterbury and the Upper South Island. So that's pretty awesome. And they've been very supportive of Canterbury Tech and our events recently. So thanks very much for your help. We've also got two new sponsors just joined us, Stratos Technology Partners. CEO David Carter is a long-term supporter and committee member of Canterbury Tech, so really happy to have your help there, and also some members of your team who are helping us out with some admin work at the moment, which is fantastic. Integration Works, they've just arrived from Christchurch and expanding their team here, and they're doing niche integrations, and we've been enjoying that so much that we've asked them to help us with our integrating some of our new systems as we go through a digital transformation as well. And of course, Present Consulting, fantastic Canterbury recruitment company here to help you with your technology hiring needs. We've been gathering some amazing benefits for our members. So if you're a member and you want to take a short course with UC, you can get a 10% discount if you email them on this email address, which is execed@canterbury.ac.nz, and you mention your membership tier. Also, from last month, we also had Carbon Trail is offering a discount. You might remember our talk from last month. So if you'd like to try out the Carbon Trail SaaS product, you can also get a 10% off an annual subscription for that. So check that one out. And if you want to know more about Carbon Trail, have a look on our YouTube channel and you can watch last month's session if you missed that one. Got a quick update on our calendar. We've been updating our calendar on the website, and we've got this amazing new ability to subscribe. So if you go to our calendar page, go to the bottom under the calendar and click subscribe, you can get the Canterbury Tech calendar onto your work calendar or your home calendar, so you'll never miss an event again. So give that a crack. Canterbury Tech's been doing quite a few special projects this month, and the first one of these is the Power Up sessions. So we've partnered with Christchurch NZ, who've been putting on this amazing Power Up Women Career Series, and we just ran on the 26th of October, the second in this series. We had 12 different tech businesses and recruiters from around Canterbury. It was really heartwarming to see women leaving the session with real connections with people, some with job offers, interviews, coffee catch-ups organised, and a real sense that they belonged in the Canterbury tech scene and that they could take their next career step into tech. The calibre of the women was amazing. We had engineers, students with a passion for cybersecurity. We had lecturers wanting to change into tech as well, like really amazing people. So if you're an employer and you're looking for staff, I encourage you to follow the Power Up session social posts, and we'll let you know about another session that's coming up before Christmas. The next one we're working on is a Canterbury Tech Skills pilot program. This is around neurodiversity. Did you know that like 1 in 10 New Zealanders are dyslexic? And we've partnered with Dorinda Britton and her amazing team of researchers to deliver one of Canterbury Tech's first special projects supporting dyslexic people into tech careers. So we've just delivered our first deliverable to MB, our funder, and want to say thanks to Vodafone for their sponsorship for this. It really is quite a special outcome. A lot of the people that have been involved in it are dyslexic themselves, and so they've been able to co-design from their experience on how we can attract, support and retain dyslexic people in the tech industry. Because there are a lot of dyslexic people working already. We've got amazing industry partners, their HR teams and also dyslexic members of their staff have been participating in that, from Indie, Trimble and Focus Software. And we're looking forward to launching the pilot program where we road test what we've designed with these teams starting off in the new year. If you're interested in sponsoring or getting involved in that in some way, let us know. We've got the Tech Summit. It is fully sold out. We are just so thrilled by your support. We've had an overwhelming response from our sponsors, and it's given us real courage next year to go bigger and bolder. But we're looking forward to seeing you all on the 24th of November for an amazing event. We've got some events coming up. We're also the week after our Tech Summit. If you've missed out on that and you're in a leadership role, you might like to go to the NZ CIO Summit, which has an Australasian flavour to it and is focused on tech leaders around Australasia. And so that's running from the 29th to the 30th. I think they do have some other events on the 28th at Tapai as well. But you can still get tickets to that now. And also, if you want to register for their free online tech talks, you can follow the link on our website or in our newsletter that just went out this morning, and you can sign up. I think there's already 6 interesting talks there from people around Australasia, around all sorts of interesting topics like employee mental health and communicating security. And one more event here, we've got the Kiwi SaaS team coming down from Wellington. I don't know if you know Serge van Dam, but he's amazing global leader in SaaS, also a Kiwi, and he's going to be facilitating a group of marketing and sales related discussions for SaaS companies. So please sign up for that. You can find the link on our website. And also Jennifer, our new marketing and events manager, is organising this awesome women's networking breakfast at BNZ, who's also a member of Canterbury Tech. So if you are interested to go along and network with some women in business, then come along to the BNZ Centre, which is also a co-working space that you can use for free as well. So hope to see you there. The last one is our Tech Summit. Just this morning, we've got the registrations up. So if you want tickets to the AGM and our quiz night, those are up and available. And we've got an amazing sponsor, Purple Shirt. They're CX, UX and innovation specialists. So we're really happy to have them help us buy you more delicious food and drink. So come join if you're a member. This one is an members only event because it's our AGM, but we'd love to see you there and get your quiz game on. Cool. And now I'll hand over to Daniel to introduce our speaker for today.
Well, welcome everyone. So for someone who probably doesn't need much of an introduction if you're in the startup space, Marian's been leading the Ministry of Awesome team since late 2017, and they're responsible for driving the dynamic startup and innovation ecosystem, which will hopefully power New Zealand's future success. So as part of that, Marian's deeply passionate about engineering the serendipity required for a successful Kiwi high growth startup community. So that includes stuff like driving collaboration between founders, investors, government connections, talent and corporates. And she does that through the Ministry of Awesome and also located at their Christchurch HQ and Startup Hub in Te Auhaka. located right next to Ara. So Marian believes that increasing participation in New Zealand's high growth startups will grow our country's global relevance and help us to attain a sustainable and high value economy. One point of note as well is that Marian is also a trustee on the board of the New Zealand High Tech Awards, and she is particularly a judge for the startup category. So any startups looking to get into that, it never hurts to have a friend in high places. So jump in and get registered. Over to you, Marian.
Thanks, Daniel. I'll just start with my pepeha, if that's okay. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko te ahu patiki toku maunga, ko Opawaho toku awa no Georgia aho, ko Johnson toku whanau, ko Marian toku inua, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks to Daniel for the introduction. My name is Marian Johnson. I'm the Chief Exec at Ministry of Awesome, and I started on the 11th of September, not the greatest date, of 2017. I've been there for about a month over 5 years now. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So hopefully we can do this. Hang on a minute. Daniel, I think, or Jennifer, can someone unshare this screen so that I can share my screen? There we go. Okay. So one moment, please, as I adjust. Oops,
and as Marian's presenting, if anyone's got any questions that they'd like asked at the end of the presentation, if you could just write them into the chat section, and then we'll pick them up and ask them at the end.
Can everyone see that okay? I'm assuming yes. All right. So I've called this presentation Startup City because that's what I hope Christchurch will be known as. In fact, I really hope that at some point in the next 5 years, Christchurch will be known as the startup city in New Zealand and the startup city in Australasia. So just some background, some of the stuff and some of these stats you guys may already know, but it never hurts to go over these key numbers that kind of underpin everything that we're doing in our strategy. But in developed economies, up to 70% of all new job growth comes from high growth startups. This applies across the entire OECD. And that's surprising for a lot of people who kind of think of high growth startups or startups as being, a very small kind of part of the sector. But the impact of these organizations is actually far more than the existing large companies that are sitting in any given economy. So what this means is that, 10 years from now, the NZX, the New York Stock Exchange, the London Stock Exchange, et cetera, is going to look very, very different from what it looks like right now. And it's going to be full of some of the high growth startups that are growing right now here in Canterbury. Also, more than ever at this stage, in terms of climate change, the impact that we're having on the environment, we really need our high growth startup founders and our innovators to be well supported and to be growing fast, because they are the future. They are the people who are going to alleviate our reliance on primary industry exports and creating our future world leading industries. I'm not sure if most of you know much about an organization that was just created by the New Zealand government about, I would say maybe 4 months ago. It was called the Startup Council. It is called the Startup Council. There are 7 people on the Startup Council. There are 3 people who are coming from venture capital. 2 of them are founders, one who is a New Zealand founder sitting in Australia, one who's a Māori founder, Grant Straker from Straker Translation, sitting here in New Zealand. There's me as a person who is working within startup support organization, also located on the South Island. Imchi Fori, who's a VC at Outset Ventures. This group of people was pulled together by MB and headed up by Minister Stuart Nash, who we've nominated as a sort of quasi minister for startups. And essentially what the Startup Council is doing is we are creating a recommendation for the government for an all of government policy that will allow us to remove some of the brakes and some of the frictions that are slowing down the growth of our high growth startup and innovation ecosystem here in New Zealand. So it's a really important piece of work that we're doing. We're starting off right now with workshops up and down the country, asking founders, asking investors, asking tech organizations what the frictions are in terms of growing startup and innovation in New Zealand. What do they need from the government? What policies need to be changed? What policies need to be brought in? What is best practice internationally? So after the work is being done up and down New Zealand, we're about 3/4 of the way through that. The next step after that is going to be having Startup Genome, who are creating a big data model globally on the startup growth and innovation ecosystem. They're going to do a scan of best practice around the world for countries that are at the same stage as we are in terms of the particular activities that we can do in order to really grow this community as fast as possible. So this is a snapshot of this thing that you can see on the screen right now is a snapshot of where we were. I believe this is about 2 years old. And what this is showing is that we have around 400 plus high growth startups in the country at the moment. And these startups are anywhere from the lower end of the valuation all the way through to the unicorns, which is, you know, the $1 billion mark. And it shows the value creation of those organizations as far as the startup ecosystem at the moment. Right now we have around 2,800 startups in the country that are either at that very, very early stage where they're pre-revenue or they're even just, they've just been registered as a company, all the way through to fully scaling and so on, and some of the ones that you can see on this map. And so as a starting point, that's where we are at the moment. But where we need to be is around 10,000 active high growth startups. And the reason for that is because in terms of benchmarks, in terms of impact that the startup ecosystem needs to have on New Zealand in order to see the GDP effect, the productivity uplift, a carbon neutral economy, et cetera, we need to get much more volume into the funnel in order to realize the successful impact on the other end. Because of course, there's a great deal of attrition, you know, when it comes to startups from being founded all the way through to scaling and success. So this is the work that we do. Ministry of Awesome, we position ourselves as a force for New Zealand startups and innovators. We began, actually, I'm going to go back a slide because we began life as a city-making organization in the years directly after the earthquake. Some of you might see at the moment on LinkedIn that we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary. We only pivoted to focusing very specifically on high-growth startup and innovation at the end of 2017 when I joined the organization. And the reason that we did that is because it was at that stage that the Christchurch and Canterbury Economic Development Agency, the vision for the city changed from essentially being this sort of primary industry focused city to, you know, with some great tech. We were always the second tech exporting city in the country, but we were not really knocking it out of the park as far as our high growth startups were concerned in terms of technology companies growing and scaling quickly. And what became clear is in creating this economic strategy that focused on transforming Christchurch into a knowledge-based economy, focusing on spaces like aerospace and future transport, future food and fiber, med tech and health tech, and then high tech underpinning all of it. we needed to make sure that as far as startups were concerned, we had a dynamic ecosystem where talent wasn't immediately going to Wellington and Auckland and Sydney and New York and Tel Aviv and London, where their startup sector was far more active, where they could get faster access to investment, and where their communities were really full and identifiable. And so when that strategy started to be formed by CNZ and others within Christchurch and Canterbury, it was pretty clear that one of the things that would underpin that knowledge economy was essentially growing and making more powerful the startup and innovation ecosystem here in Christchurch and Canterbury. So that's why we changed our strategy. That's why we focus very specifically on startups and innovators and essentially the early stage of that pipeline. So in terms of where we are in New Zealand, I mentioned that there's an organization called the Startup Genome, and Startup Genome is a global organization that has the most robust data on startup ecosystems around the world. And what phases they're in, and basically all the metrics that you could possibly want to slice on how to get there. At the moment, Startup Genome puts us at activation phase, which is really the first step. And at activation phase, what that means is that there's not that many exits. What that means is that in terms of investment capital and in terms of startup phases, whether startups are scaling or they're at the very beginning end or whatever, in terms of those numbers put us at activation phase. So the jobs that have to be done at activation phase are these three. And this has been our strategy since 2018. So job number one is about role modeling and storytelling. It's what I call making startups a thing. So when we talk about making startups a thing, what we're trying to do is we're trying to show the community what a startup is all about, what we mean when we say high growth startup, what a founder's journey might be, what it might look like, what success might look like, and talking about that journey so that others are inspired to get started on their ambition, others are inspired maybe to lift their vision and make their ambition that much bigger so that they're thinking global, not necessarily regional, not just I'm going to get really big and then I'm going to go to Australia and that's enough of it. But actually going really, really big with their technology. So role modeling, storytelling, making startups a thing was a key part of our strategy and continues to be a key part of our strategy. The second piece of our strategy was around once people come into the top of the pipeline, they have that huge ambition, they have a great value proposition, they have a solution for a problem, that solution is potentially scalable. We identify that talent and then we build their capability. We connect them immediately to a network and into investment pipelines. And some examples of how we might do that right now is through our incubator at Te Ohaka. And I'll tell you a little bit about that later in this piece. And the third piece of our strategy is about building entrepreneurial density. And what that means is that we're basically, instead of having what there was in 2017, which is all these amazing pockets of activity, but not a lot of volume at any of those pockets, we tried to put everyone together so that there was one or two main pockets of activity, and then everyone could meet everyone else within that group. And then we tried to bring all of the key players together. And the key players from our perspective are obviously startup founders who may or may not have launched yet. Maybe they just have an idea, but they're thinking about it. So startup founders, students who might help those startup founders, students who themselves might be able to ideate and start thinking about their ambition in terms of innovation, bringing together investors. So investors who could help in terms of developing, creating the capital that would allow those founders to build whatever solution they were building. The fourth piece being the community, where you might find other talent, members of your future team. And the fifth piece being, and this is a crucial one, corporates. So corporates and large organizations who may have problems that need to be solved within a specific domain, and who we are trying to encourage to use the startup ecosystem as their external innovation engine. So that's been our strategy for some time now, and it's actually done us in good stead. Other point that I wanted to make is that at Ministry of Awesome, our focus is at the very, very top of the pipeline. So we are specifically focusing on early stage startups. Essentially, we are looking at that period between ideation and pre-revenue. So most of the startups that we're talking about, you can't have had an idea yesterday in the shower. You must have done some sort of validation. Potentially you have a prototype or a minimum viable product. From there, we can start to work with you. Before that, it just takes too much time. We lose too many people. We can really start working with you once it's a little bit meatier at that point. And we are really the only organization in the country who are working at that point, because it's at that very, very early stage. There's nothing to be, there's no money to be had. So we can't sell our services there. There's very little to invest in. It's a very high risk investment. And that's why we find ourselves so lonely in that very, very early stage space. But, and this is the other thing I wanted to say, and the reason why I'm really pleased to be on the Startup Council, because most of the time people talk about startups and talk about the phases of startups. Most people really start talking about startups and getting active in startups when investment begins to occur, or when there's an investable organization. But you don't have an investable organization unless you have the volume at the top of the pipeline. So you need 100 people coming in at the top with their amazing ideas in order for you to have 0.5 coming through that are investable. So volume is really important. And that's why our focus is the top of the pipeline. And I'm forever making that point at Startup Council because there's a job to be done before we start talking about, the money products or the investment products. So job one, making startups a thing. Some of the examples are, I don't know if you are all aware of this, but we put on New Zealand's first ever Women Founders Conference called Electrify Aotearoa. It took place at Isaac Theatre on the 26th of May this year. We had 450 women from across the country. 44% of the people who turned up were from Canterbury, and the other 56% were from outside of Canterbury, predominantly Aucklanders, people from Wellington, and then the rest of the country. Fast fact, the reason we did this is because 83% of all venture capital worldwide is invested into all male founder teams, 2% into women founder teams, but we know that the capability and the return on investment for women high growth startup founders is actually better than for all male teams. And if you want me to send you some stats on that, I'm happy to. There's plenty of studies that have been done by Bain & Co, McKinsey, and so on in terms of the ROI of women founders. And this is not boys against girls. This is simply about parity and what is good in terms of, we all know that the greater diversity you have in an organization, the more likelihood you have of a positive impact. And so for the world, we need more women founders taking part in startup and innovation, because at this stage, 83% of our future focused businesses are being built by all male teams. And obviously that's going to be missing out from 50% of the population's vision and experience. So that's why we put on Electrify Aotearoa. It was incredibly successful. This last year, we had incredible speakers, and it's going to be happening again in March 2023, so at the very end of March. This is some ideas of what the event itself looked like. Job number 2, identifying talent, building capability, connecting and investment pipelines. So you may drive past this building on a regular basis. This is on the Ōta campus, and we are the ground floor. So we have an incredible startup hub, which is born out of a partnership between Ōta Institute of Canterbury and Christchurch NZ. And now, thankfully, we are also joined in this by Callahan Innovation. So job number 3, we build entrepreneurial density and we engineer serendipity. An example of this is bringing larger organizations like our electricity distribution board with Ōtautahi, which is the New Zealand government's carbon zero organization, finding future of energy in our accelerators. So we have just launched this year's accelerator. Last year's was one of our most successful accelerators, with multiple founders going through the process and raising capital at the very end. This year, we're working with 10 amazing founders, working on that sort of bleeding edge of energy innovation, and I'm pretty excited about the outcome. We did an accelerator with Health Tech Challenge with Ryman Healthcare a couple of years ago, and then again this year. And in terms of impact, this is where we're at. 113 startups we've worked with so far since May 2019, $40 million capital raised, and considering these people are coming in pre-revenue, the impact's pretty good in terms of new jobs that have been created by the startups who've gone through our incubator or accelerators. So far, we're 234 new jobs for the Canterbury economy. And that is pretty much rounds up my presentation. Really keen to answer any questions anybody might have or debate.
Yep. So yeah, we've got a discussion happening in the chat about what is a startup. So I guess maybe from your perspective or from the perspective of Ministry of Awesome, how do you define or classify a startup?
Yeah. I mean, that is such a crucial question, because a lot of people will say, I have a startup. It's an accountancy, and I'm hoping to focus on Instagram influencers with my accountancy. No, that's not a startup unless it is global from day one, or there's a vision of going global from day one. It's something scalable, and that there's something, generally technology, some sort of innovation underpins the value proposition. And it's something that is somewhat disruptive, whether that's through the business model or whether the technology is something that is brand new.
Cool. And then, I mean, I'm not sure if you can answer this, seeing it was on that diagram you mentioned that was a couple of years old at the start, that had places like Sequent and Xero. Was the reason they were on there was because they were still considered high growth? Because yes, I guess some people wouldn't consider them startups at this stage necessarily.
Yeah, I think that was basically showing the trajectory of, when you talk about startups, you talk about all of the different phases of a startup. You have the very beginning where you're ideating. You have the second piece, which is sort of pre-seed, pre-investment, pre-revenue. You're maybe at your prototype or whatever. And the final phase in this whole kind of VC's view of the start of a startup phases is exiting as a unicorn, right? So at the far end, you had Xero, you had Sequent, you had some of those larger organizations in New Zealand that have exited to that extent. We're not saying that they are startups at one point. Obviously they were, but they had attained the holy grail, which is when they come off the end to show how important and what kind of economic impact these companies have on the local economy, regional economy, and the global economy. And I can see Julian here saying even Sequent is still in growth phase. I mean, absolutely, they're definitely going to be growing. But I mean, when we're talking about startup and in particular that diagram, it wasn't saying that everyone on the diagram is a startup. They were all technology-based companies, but it shows all of the different phases and that sort of $1 billion exit, which is the unicorn piece from startup lingo.
Cool, thank you. And another question that's come up in the chat is, hi, I have 3 ideas I want to execute. Is there any good strategy for finding product market fit quicker? I am working on online surveys without start building. Thanks. Is the answer just to get in touch with you?
To some extent, yes. But generally we don't work with anyone at that very, very early stage. We'd probably connect them with resources, or if they're a particular sector, for example, if it has anything to do with any of our accelerators, we might suggest the accelerator, or we might ask them to contact Jeffrey Ling, who was our head of our incubator, and potentially depending on where they're at with the development of those startup ideas, there could be room in the incubator, which is a constant, there's no particular time we bring people in. It's always a rolling admissions for the incubator. In terms of basically establishing product market fit, geez, I mean, some companies are still establishing product market fit, but they're definitely deep into revenue. That sort of process doesn't really stop. But in terms of traction, the hardest thing is that market validation piece, which is essentially what the person is talking about doing now, which is the online surveys and so on. I mean, certainly get in touch. We'll see if we can help you, connect you to
Oh, I think we seem to have lost you there, Marian.
people who are working in the space. You can join the Slack.
Oh, just me now. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer any of your questions. We'll just see if we can get her back on the line.
I think I'm back.
Oh, you're back. There you are. Cool.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. Can we
That's
pin your
fine.
screen so it's your face and not mine in the middle?
Oh, I don't know how to do that.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, there we go. I don't know where you lost me because I was talking and talking and talking.
About 10 seconds in.
Were we still talking about market validation?
Yes.
Right. So my suggestion was to connect with Ministry of Awesome. Just hit us up at info@Ministry of Awesome, and then we can diagnose where you're at and then see how we might connect you to someone who can help. But the other thing is there could be an incubator, there could be an accelerator that's right for you. It could be that you just need to talk to us in the community. I'd also suggest coming along to Startup Breakfast Club, which is once a month. You get free breakfast, and we're generally talking to some extent around validation, those early stages of growth. So it might be a really valuable community to connect with.
Cool. Excellent. And got about 3 more questions. First one, has the ability of Christchurch as a city to support tech startups evolved over the last 5 years? And how have they adapted and evolved, if that is the case?
Well, for starters, we've now there's all the stuff that I've been telling you about Ministry of Awesome, and generally the startups that we're talking about are tech startups, even if they are, multiple sectors. So we've got everyone from agri to retail, to hardware products that are tech products, to platforms, marketing platforms and product platforms, and all sorts of different types of tech startups. And so having had a formalized incubation program, that's a massive change for Christchurch and Canterbury. There certainly wasn't one 5 years ago that was consistent and populated by the startup support services that we have at the moment. At this stage, we have 82 mentors from around the world, everywhere from Singapore to California. We've got some incredible people leading the way who are part of that incubation program. The other thing I'd like to say is that our accelerators are now supported by Callahan Innovation. So we were fortunate to win the Callahan contract that recently came out on startup services. The one that is anybody reading the furore on LinkedIn around Callahan at the moment, that we won that particular contract. And we're really grateful for that, because that means that everything that we're doing incubation wise is also national. And it also means that the accelerators that we're running have much more impact and have much more value in terms of the quality of support that we can put behind founders, because we're not doing it all on our own anymore. It's actually a massive change from 5 years ago. So I think if you reach out, if you are a startup founder and you're in Christchurch, you're really lucky to be here, because I mean, even if you look at Auckland or you look at Wellington, well, actually Wellington with Creative HQ has some pretty good support, but it's really hard to piece it all together in many other centers.
Cool. And someone else says one of the hardest things for a startup to do is to achieve proof of, one of the hardest things is to achieve the proof of concept stage. Is there an ability to access capital for prototypes, i.e. alternative energy source?
We've been playing around with this idea for a while. And in fact, so if you're part of one of the accelerators that, especially in an area that is high tech, where a lot of research has to be done in advance, there is potential for having non-vested capital upfront. Also through Callahan, there's a great deal of opportunity from that perspective, which the person who's asked this question is probably super aware of that. And we are also playing around with the idea of raising a fund for people who have an idea that hasn't been proven, but need to be able to fund the start of it. So these are really small checks. The other thing you might want to investigate is that via Blackbird Ventures, they have something called, I think it's called the Passion grants, and they're $5,000 to anyone who is working on something high impact. It could be tech. It could be anything. They have a pretty strong acceptance process, but they're not particularly tight on exactly what they're looking for. So it really depends on the dollars you're looking for, what you need to do, how much work you've already put into it, et cetera. But if you're working on something, please get in touch.
Cool. And I think we'll finish off with just this last one. How do entities protect their idea IP if they are shared with Ministry of Awesome?
Well, straight away, the IP is 100% the founders. Ministry of Awesome doesn't take any vested interest in any of the startups that we work with. It's not a quid pro quo. Even with our accelerators, it's not a vested interest. And of course, we have NDAs. If you're part of an accelerator, there's a really strong NDA there's an NDA, which is as strong as an NDA can be, that ensures that any of the mentors, the coaches, the Ministry of Awesome team, et cetera, are acknowledged that the idea belongs to the entrepreneur. Having said that, I have found over the last 5 years, and many venture capital and early stage investment people feel exactly the same way, that there's very little value in an idea unless it's a technical idea, unless it's like a blueprint, a prototype, something very specific. But if it's an idea that is that anyone might have, there's very little value in that. The value is in actually the validation of it and the development of the idea and the creation of the idea. Very early on, people used to come all the time and say, I have a great idea, I'll sell it. Here's my idea. It's mayonnaise in a can with tuna. There you go, $5,000. Well, there's nothing in it. There's no value in that. So spending a lot of time worrying about confidentiality and DNA doesn't necessarily apply that early on.
Excellent. Cool. Well, thanks for your time. Was there a slide that you had with your contact details, or people just head along to the Ministry of Awesome website for more info?
Just head along to the website. I mean, my name is Marian, and it's spelled Marian. Just think the librarian. So Marian at ministryofawesome.com. Just get in touch. If you're working on something that is high growth, that is innovative, if you have huge ambition, if you are really focused and serious, please get in touch.
Cool. Excellent. And thanks, Jen, for putting those contact details into the chat. So they should be there for anyone who wants to copy and paste them.
Thanks everyone for your time. And hey, shout out to Julian Cohn, who I can see up there in the corner, one of the original of the originals.
One of the originals, yeah.
Ministry of Awesome, way back in the day, 10 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah. You've come a long way in 10 years. And you've done a great job, Marian.
Thanks, Julian. Thanks everyone for your time and for listening to me.
Thank you so much for your time. It's so great to hear about all the foundations that have been set in place and the amazing work that continues. Look forward to working even more closely with you guys in the future.
Woohoo.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Good afternoon.